Thank you for tuning in to episode 8 of the NC Chambers podcast, Relaunching North Carolina, Perspectives from NC Business Leaders. The goal of this series is to make sure we're capturing and amplifying the voice of the business community as we move forward with reopening our state's economy and getting folks back to work. Today, we're honored to have with us Jamey Millar, Senior Vice President of Managed Markets and Government Affairs for GlaxoSmithKline. Jamey has responsibility for public policy and government relations, pricing, reimbursement, access, and distribution for all of GSK's medicines and vaccines in the U.S. Prior to his current role, Jamey was Vice President and head of the U.S. oncology business. For nearly 30 years, Jamey has built extensive commercial experience working with providers, hospitals, health systems, and public and private payers across multiple therapeutic areas. In addition, Jamey chairs GSK's U.S. Corporate Contributions Committee, is the executive sponsor of the Cancer Awareness and Resources for Employees, ERG, and is a member of the Global Disability Council, ERG. Prior to joining GSK in 2001, Jamey spent 11 years with Procter & Gamble Pharmaceuticals, where he held a variety of positions, including country manager for the UK, Netherlands, and Ireland. Outside of GSK, Jamey is a board member for the NC Chamber, California Life Sciences Association, and North Carolina Healthcare Quality Alliance. Jamey, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome. It's my pleasure.
So before we get into the discussion about COVID-19 in particular, I would love to hear you, just in your own words, tell us what your ties to the North Carolina business community are.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Well, first of all, I've lived here for 20 years working at GlaxoSmithKline in Research Triangle Park. My wife works at UNC's business school, so hopefully churning out future business leaders in North Carolina. We also have 4 kids, and they certainly seem to consume many, many goods and services in the state, so we're consumers and taxpayers. But beyond that, I'm privileged to serve on the board of directors for the North Carolina Chamber of Commerce, as well as the board for North Carolina's Healthcare Quality Alliance. And I've previously served on the board for CED, the Center for Entrepreneurial Development.
Great. So let's get into the COVID talk now. And before we get to the business side of that, if you're comfortable, I'd love to hear you talk about how it's impacted you personally. I mean, even if it hasn't had a physical impact, and of course, we hope it hasn't, a lot of people are struggling with the lack of connection that they have to their loved ones and their distant relatives, and would just love to hear your perspective on that and how it's impacted you as an individual.
Yeah, no, thank you. So personally, like so many, I'm talking to you from home. Yeah. You may have heard the dog barking in the background.
You'll hear mine too eventually, I'm sure.
Exactly. So we're at home with 6 in the house. There are 3 of us working. My oldest son works for Deloitte Consulting, and 3 high school and college students. So, juggling all those demands, work and family, is especially challenging in light of the pandemic. As far as we know, none of us have been tested, but as far as we know, we've steered clear of the virus. But both my wife and I have elderly parents, and both have actually been hospitalized, not for COVID, but for other reasons. So, dealing with elderly parents hospitalized and then in short-term, long-term care for physical therapy and occupational therapy. Obviously, that's not a setting that anyone wants to be in right now from a exposure to the virus perspective. So that creates some extra stresses, in your life. So, like so many, just dealing with the personal demands. On the business side, it's created, a lot of extra work, but at the same time, so many opportunities for a company like GSK to be part of the solution. Obviously, all of our COVID-related work is on top of what was already expected to be a very busy 2020 for the company. Right. Patients with other conditions, diseases like cancer, patients living with severe asthma, with lupus, obviously they can't be deprioritized in light of the pandemic. So it's been a question of, delivering all
Right.
the additional priorities opposed to making trade-offs.
In your position, you're really well connected, and GSK is, of course, a global company. So I'm sure your network is very, very broad in terms of the business leaders that you come in contact with. What can you share about how they're looking at the situation? And then, if you can, also share how GSK is looking at this situation.
Yeah, no, great question. I think, to a business leader, to a person, the main focus is on the human,
Mm-hmm.
aspect of this. So first and foremost, the safety and well-being of our employees, that's the top priority.
Right.
Whether, you're in a business and have employees that are deemed, quote unquote, essential workers, enabled to physically go into work, which creates additional considerations, or able to work remotely. Again, people is the first priority. As a group, I think every employer naturally is also very concerned about business continuity.
Sure.
It's a very delicate balance that everyone's trying to manage. And frankly, that calculation, that emphasis on people in business continuity, varies perhaps based on the type of business that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
At GSK, as a global healthcare company, we have to maintain our ability to help all of our patients in need, those with or those without COVID-19. So as COVID-related guidance has come out from Governor Cooper and the task force, or at the federal level, we've followed that very carefully, and as they continue to evolve across the country and in the state of North Carolina. So we are operating at a very high degree of care, as the virus remains obviously a very serious public health threat. And lastly, I'd say, for small businesses or businesses in North Carolina that have been impacted by the pandemic, and it's virtually everyone, I would imagine, my advice would be to stay close to state-based guidance,
Mm-hmm.
continue to follow the guidance that as it unfolds, but also, understand what's available to you from a financial aid perspective at the state or local level, given some of the aid packages that have been passed and available.
Sort of along the same lines, we were just talking briefly about the North Carolina response to COVID. Is there anything you'd like to see change in that state level response?
Yeah, I do have, like so many business leaders, that context or perspective, the ability to look across multiple states, if not the United States in total, but also, how other countries, we're a global multinational country, so company rather. And so I'm very complimentary of the thoughtful approach that North Carolina government officials and Secretary of Health have taken. Mm-hmm. I think it's very fact-based, science-based. In terms of, continued opportunities, I know on behalf of the Chamber, I also agree that continued dialogue with the business community, transparency, constant communication in what is a rapidly changing and dynamic circumstance, all of that dialogue between business and elected officials is very welcome and important in times like this. I think as employers are concerned about employees and their business continuity, we have to maintain that trust between business and government, with the understanding that everybody's trying to do the right thing. So communication, coordination between the government and business is key.
Absolutely. I think you hit on a key point there that is oftentimes missed when emotions are running high and everyone's frustrated. I think at the end of the day, our decision makers do have everyone's best interest at heart. And sometimes it's easy to lose sight of that fact. So thank you for pointing that out. As someone with extensive business experience, what advice could you share with other business leaders who are really struggling right now with the level of uncertainty that's thrown at them every day? Anything you could share?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because we all face business challenges. I don't think any of us have faced something of this magnitude related to this pandemic. So my advice, focus on your people, really lean into your employee base. I've personally found that this experience has allowed me to get to know and understand my team at a deeper level.
Mm-hmm.
It's a kind of lesson in understanding and appreciating difference, because everyone truly is experiencing this pandemic in different ways, just as you described. Someone
Right.
who may be caring for an elderly parent versus parents of really young kids trying to deal with remote learning and keeping them active when they can't go out into the neighborhood per se and play as they normally would.
Right.
So everybody's experiencing this in a different way, and understanding that difference is really helpful. I would say stay true to your values and mission as a company. For us at GSK as a healthcare company, a healthcare crisis like COVID-19 should be where we can really demonstrate our strengths. And in doing so, I've found that to be really motivating in challenging times. The reward for the effort in helping patients in need is a great motivator. And just maybe a couple of examples of that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
GSK has created at least 7 global partnerships at this point, supporting development of both therapeutic interventions, i.e. medicines, as well as vaccines for the prevention of COVID-19. We are the world's largest vaccines maker.
Mm-hmm.
We're working with companies and research groups around the world on promising vaccine candidates using what's called our platform adjuvant technology.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
just quickly, the use of an adjuvant in a vaccine is of particular importance in a pandemic, because it allows for greater efficacy on the one hand, but also it reduces the amount of vaccine protein required per dose, which means you can make or manufacture more vaccine doses overall. So we, like so many other companies, are kind of at the forefront of working on that vaccine. To give you another example, though, a little closer to home here in North Carolina, Zebulon, North Carolina, our manufacturing site, is the site for the vast majority of our respiratory inhaler products for asthma and COPD around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And we discovered very early in the pandemic that a 50-year-old product used for asthma that's manufactured and packaged at the Zebulon site was being used for COVID-19 patients in the intensive care units, those patients that were on ventilators, as a, at times, last chance attempt to help them breathe. And it was really, really a paradigm shift to understand that when we did. And that created, however, unprecedented demand increases for the product. And a 50-year-old product, before COVID, it was a very predictable demand line. Right. And this demand was largely driven, as you'd expect, by hospital purchasers.
Sure.
So we really had to mobilize quickly. We added staff at Zebulon. We went to a 24/7 model, and we actually had to charter flights from Évora, France, our secondary site for the product.
Wow.
Because commercial air travel, has been so restricted across continents. So we worked closely with, our customers and government officials to enable communication on expected volumes and delivery, and we've worked through the bolus of demand, and we're now in a more stable position, and hopefully we'll avoid, a true second wave, et cetera, with the virus. But I think the combination of these two areas of emphasis, the first story I told you, just keeping employees motivated and patients at the center of our innovation, and then the second one just being customer focused. Those two principles have really enabled these two examples.
I love that. And you just spoke about the importance of being mission-centered, all the time, but especially during a crisis like this. And that's one way to keep employees motivated. What are some other ways that you know of that GSK is keeping morale as high as it can be for your teams during this time?
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned before, communication is absolutely the key. Be direct, engaging with the employees about their well-being and mental health. That's another thing that really has risen in light of this pandemic. You mentioned, isolation, loneliness. We really can't underestimate, the impacts that this may be having on individuals. So
Right.
staying close to their well-being and mental health, checking in regularly is definitely encouraged. I'm personally, you really have to encourage people to take time off.
You do.
To rebalance and take a break, because as I mentioned, the workload's really double
I'm sure.
normal in this environment. So work-life balance really is essential. Even if it has to be a staycation for some,
Right. Yeah.
just to be able to free your mind from work is really, really helpful. When you do have news to share, deliver the updates and information, in a timely manner to avoid any, rumor or churn. One of the ways we at GSK, to your question, have kept people engaged is we call them Let's Talk and Let's Listen sessions, town halls, where employees can hear directly from leadership and colleagues and submit any questions that they had. And obviously on top of the pandemic, like everyone, we have also been discussing, learning, responding to issues related to societal racism, right? The events that have occurred outside of our companies that cannot help but have an impact on people inside the company. And I care deeply about inclusion and diversity in this topic. We're working hard to ensure our employees have a safe space to share their feelings and concerns, and that we as a company are doing all we can to advance inclusion and diversity. I think, businesses should take stock of the challenges, but also on the optimistic side, look for opportunities. So our trio of areas of emphasis are people, business continuity, and solutions. And I think that solution orientation is really important in these times.
I love that. You're so right. Our society right now is being hit with this confluence of the pandemic and then also these racial justice issues that have always been present but have come to the forefront based on some recent events. And the toll it takes on emotional and mental health is astounding. And so it's really encouraging to know that even though GSK is working overtime, doing everything it usually does on top of advancing this research and development for treatment of COVID, that's still a focus. That's really amazing and greatly appreciated and so important during this time. What's encouraged you the most during this pandemic? And, I say encourage, maybe that's not the right word even, but what are some good things that you've heard, some good news, some silver linings that we can take away in light of all this negativity that seems to be surrounding us right now?
Yeah, no, great question. Encouraged, inspired. Yeah, encouraged is absolutely a good question. So a lot of selfless acts. Obviously, our frontline healthcare workers have, gained a lot of respect and attention, through all this. But, in many walks of life, a lot of heroic commitments made and delivered. North Carolina healthcare institutions, our businesses, and our workers really have been right at the heart of that. Mm-hmm. Additionally, I guess unsurprisingly, the commitment of my colleagues at GSK to find solutions for the pandemic, some of the examples that I shared with you, adopting new ways of working really quickly, and obviously probably inordinate hours to deliver this. But that resolve and resilience and dedication has definitely been encouraging.
Absolutely. We hear the word resilience a lot, but I haven't heard resolve as much. And I think that's a really, really key word there. And it sounds like it definitely applies to your workforce and your team at GSK. We talked earlier about the fact that there's this obvious impact on profits and revenue for the business community, but that ultimately businesses are still finding ways to make their people, whether it be their employees, their customers, their shareholders, whomever, their communities, the priority during a time like this. What are some specific ways that you think businesses can continue to do this and can continue to make people a priority in light of the fact that we don't know when this pandemic is going to end or we're going to have a treatment for it?
Yeah, it's really tough. I mean, there's business deferred or delayed that will come back, and then there's just business lost. And
right.
I think those that are just losing business and or we've lost a number of restaurants here in Chapel Hill,
right,
that won't come back, right? So
right.
It's really challenging, and in view of what principally is a healthcare crisis, obviously it's an economic crisis along with it. So as mentioned, I guess finding the balance between employee safety and business continuity is the delicate and difficult
right.
balance. So I guess I'd just fall back on the notion that transparent communication is the key. Explain what actions you as a employer intend to take and why. And I would underscore the why. People can hear the action, but they really need to understand the rationale. So sometimes it's difficult to get 100% agreement on that, but at least there's understanding for the rationale for decisions and actions taken. And these are really tough times for the actions and decisions.
Jamey, is there anything else you'd like to leave our audience with before we wrap it up for the day?
Well, maybe we'll leave it on an optimistic light. I really do feel we're all going to get through this. There is a other side of the rainbow here, and we will all have learned a tremendous amount at every level: business, government, large, small employer, and as individuals, right, dealing with work-life issues that we talked about, needing to be resilient and optimistic. And I think we'll come out of this stronger than we were going into it, and all the lessons learned will help avoid a similar situation in the future.
And we definitely appreciate all that you and your team is doing, not just in North Carolina, not just in the United States, but globally, to help us come through this stronger than we were before. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jamey Millar, Senior Vice President of Managed Markets and Government Affairs for the U.S. for GSK. Jamey, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.